He waited 7 hours at the airport to see his idol, but he never imagined that Reba Mcentire would completely change his life that day. The fluorescent lights of Nashville International Airport cast harsh shadows across Lucas Thompson's weathered face as he clutched his mother's old guitar case against his chest. 7 hours. That's how long he had been sitting on the cold metal bench near Gate 12, watching travelers rush past him with purpose he had lost months ago. His 28-year-old frame looked older, worn down by 3 months of rejection and dreams that seemed to crumble a little more each day. The announcement echoed through the terminal for what felt like the 100th time that afternoon. Flight delays, weather conditions, technical difficulties. Lucas didn't care about the reasons anymore. All he knew was that somewhere on one of those delayed flights was Reba Mcentire, the woman whose voice had been the soundtrack to his childhood, the artist his mother had loved with every fiber of her being until cancer stole her away 5 years ago. His fingers traced the familiar scratches on the guitar case, each mark telling a story of late nights when his mother, Sarah Thompson, would sit on their tiny front porch in Millerville, Tennessee, population 3,000 and shrinking. She would play her worn Reba Mcentire vinyl records on an old turntable that skipped on the second verse of Fancy every single time. Lucas could still hear her humming along, her voice growing weaker with each passing month, but never losing its warmth when she sang those beloved country melodies. "One day, baby," she would whisper during her final weeks, her hand resting on the guitar she had saved every penny to buy him for his 16th birthday. "One day you're going to make it to Nashville, and you're going to show them what real country music sounds like. You got something special, Lucas. Don't you ever forget that." But sitting in that airport, with $17 left in his wallet and a bus ticket back to Millerville scheduled for tomorrow morning, Lucas felt anything but special. The city that was supposed to welcome dreamers like him had shown him nothing but closed doors and dismissive glances. Music Row had been particularly cruel, with producers who looked at his second-hand clothes and heard his small-town accent before he even opened his mouth to sing. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how Lucas's incredible journey unfolds, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world, and your support means everything to us as we continue bringing you these amazing true stories that prove dreams can come true in the most unexpected ways. The memory of his last audition still burned in his chest like acid. Marcus Kellerman, one of Nashville's most successful producers, had actually laughed when Lucas finished his song. Not polite applause or constructive criticism, but genuine laughter that echoed through the sterile conference room like a slap across his face. "Son, you sound like every other wannabe who rolls into this town thinking they're the next big thing," Kellerman had said, not bothering to look up from his phone. "You got a nice voice, I'll give you that, but nice voices are a dime a dozen here. You need polish, professional training, connections. You need to lose that backwoods twang and learn how the music business really works. My advice, go home, get yourself a real job, and save everyone the embarrassment." Lucas had stood there in stunned silence, watching as Kellerman's assistant ushered him toward the door like he was being removed from a crime scene. The worst part wasn't the rejection itself, it was the casual cruelty of it. The way they dismissed not just his music, but everything he represented. His mother's memory, his small town, his dreams. The guitar case suddenly felt heavier against his chest as he remembered walking out of that building 3 days ago, his face burning with shame and his heart breaking into pieces that seemed impossible to put back together. He had called his Uncle Jim that night, accepting the factory job back home that would pay enough to help his father with the medical bills that kept piling up despite Sarah Thompson being gone for 5 years now. His father, Robert Thompson, had been battling diabetes and depression since losing his wife, and Lucas had been his primary caregiver for years, before finally finding the courage to chase his Nashville dream. The guilt of leaving had eaten at him every single day, even though his father had insisted he go, had practically pushed him out the door with tears in his eyes and a blessing on his lips. "Your mama would never forgive me if I let you give up on this," Robert had said that cold February morning when Lucas loaded his few possessions into their old pickup truck. "She believed in you more than anything in this world. You owe it to her memory to try." Now sitting in this airport with nothing to show for 3 months of trying except empty pockets and a broken spirit, Lucas wondered if his mother had been wrong about him. Maybe he was just another small-town dreamer who didn't understand how the real world worked. Maybe Marcus Kellerman had been right about everything, but something deep inside him, some stubborn piece of his mother's unwavering faith, had brought him to this airport today. When he saw the post in the Reba Mcentire fan group on social media announcing that she would be flying into Nashville this afternoon after her concert series in Texas, Lucas felt a pull he couldn't ignore. It wasn't rational. It wasn't going to change anything about his situation, but he had to be here, had to see the woman who had given his mother so much joy during the darkest period of her life. The crowd around Gate 12 had grown and shrunk throughout the day as flight delays were announced, and disappointed fans gradually gave up and went home. Now, as the afternoon stretched into early evening, only a handful of die-hard admirers remained, and Lucas wondered if he was being foolish for staying so long. His bus ticket back to Millerville was for tomorrow morning, and he still needed to pack his few belongings from the tiny room he had been renting above a barber shop on the outskirts of town. A young woman with a Team Reba t-shirt sat down next to him on the bench, her phone battery apparently dead and her enthusiasm visibly waning. She glanced at Lucas's guitar case and smiled tiredly. "You a musician?" she asked, her voice carrying the slight twang of someone from rural Alabama or Mississippi. Lucas nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady if he tried to explain his situation. The woman seemed to understand his reluctance to talk and simply sat in comfortable silence, both of them watching the gate area for any sign of activity. "I drove all the way from Huntsville," she finally said. "Took 2 days off work I couldn't afford to lose. My mama passed last year and Reba was her absolute favorite. I just wanted to see her, just to say thank you for all the comfort her music brought us during the hard times." Lucas felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. This stranger's words echoed his own feelings so perfectly. It was almost painful. He reached into his worn denim jacket and pulled out a faded photograph, its edges soft from years of handling. The image showed his mother, radiant despite her obvious illness, holding a vinyl copy of Reba's greatest hits album and smiling with pure joy. "This was taken about a month before she passed," Lucas said quietly, his voice barely audible above the airport noise. "She made me promise to bring this picture to Nashville when I came to pursue my music career. Said Reba would want to know that her songs helped us through the worst time of our lives." The woman from Huntsville studied the photograph with reverence, understanding immediately the sacred nature of what Lucas was sharing with her. They sat together in the growing twilight of the terminal, two strangers bound by grief and hope and the power of music to heal wounds that seemed too deep for anything else to touch. Neither of them could have imagined that in less than an hour, everything about Lucas Thompson's life would change forever, setting in motion a series of events that would prove his mother's faith in him had been justified all along. The airport announcement system crackled to life once more, but this time the message would be different, and the woman walking through that gate would see something in a young man's eyes that would compel her to stop, listen, and ultimately change both their lives in ways neither could have predicted. The terminal lights seemed to brighten as an announcement finally broke through the monotonous cycle of delays. "Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 274 from Dallas has now arrived at Gate 12. Lucas felt his heart skip a beat as he watched the woman from Huntsville quickly gather her belongings, her face lighting up with renewed hope. Around them, the few remaining fans stirred to life, phones emerging from pockets and purses as people positioned themselves for the best possible view. Lucas remained seated, his mother's photograph still clutched in his trembling hands, unsure of what he hoped to accomplish by being here. Part of him wanted to run, to avoid the potential disappointment of seeing his childhood idol from a distance and feeling even more disconnected from his dreams. But his mother's voice echoed in his memory, as clear as if she were sitting beside him on that cold metal bench. "Sometimes, baby, the universe puts us exactly where we need to be, even when we don't understand why." Sarah Thompson had said those words during one of her final lucid moments, when the cancer medication made her drift in and out of consciousness, but somehow left her most important thoughts crystal clear. The first passengers began emerging from the jetway, business travelers with their rolling luggage and tired expressions, families reuniting with squeals of joy, couples embracing after time apart. Lucas watched each face, his anxiety building with every person who wasn't the country music legend he had come to see. The woman from Huntsville moved closer to the gate area, her phone ready to capture any glimpse of her late mother's favorite singer. Then, like a scene from one of those movies his mother used to love watching on Sunday afternoons, she appeared, Reba Mcentire walked through the gate with the confident stride of someone who had conquered stages around the world, yet there was something approachable about her presence that immediately set her apart from the celebrity caricatures Lucas had imagined. She wore simple jeans and a denim jacket, her famous red hair styled casually, and her smile genuine as she acknowledged the small group of fans who had waited so patiently. 2 security guards flanked her, professional but not aggressive, clearly accustomed to managing these spontaneous fan encounters with grace. Reba moved toward the waiting fans, signing autographs and taking selfies with each person, treating them not as interruptions, but as valued supporters who deserved her time and attention. Lucas watched from his bench, mesmerized by the warmth she showed to each person. When she reached the woman from Huntsville, he could see tears streaming down the fan's face as she explained about her mother's love for Reba's music. The country star listened intently, hugged the woman tightly, and spent several minutes talking with her about grief, healing, and the power of music to connect generations. Something about that interaction unlocked a door in Lucas's chest that had been sealed shut since his humiliating audition with Marcus Kellerman. His mother's guitar case suddenly felt lighter in his hands, and before his rational mind could stop him, he found himself standing up and walking toward the small crowd surrounding Reba. But as he approached, the security guards subtly shifted position, creating a protective barrier that clearly communicated he should maintain his distance. Lucas stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to hear Reba's voice but far enough to respect the boundaries her team had established. He watched as she finished greeting the last fan, a teenage girl who was crying with joy over meeting her idol. Reba was preparing to leave when something made her pause and look directly at Lucas. Their eyes met across that small distance, and in that moment something passed between them that neither could have anticipated. She saw a young man holding a guitar case, like it contained the most precious thing in the world, his face etched with a particular kind of pain that she recognized from her own journey in the music industry. Lucas felt his mother's presence so strongly in that moment that it took his breath away. Without conscious thought, without permission from his logical mind, he began to sing, not loudly, not as a performance, but as a prayer made audible. The song that emerged from his lips was "The Greatest Man I Never Knew," one of Reba's most emotionally powerful ballads, and the song his mother had requested during her final days in the hospital. His voice, roughened by months of disappointment, but still carrying the pure emotional resonance that had made Sarah Thompson believe so fiercely in her son's gift, filled the small space around Gate 12. The melody floated through the air like a gentle current, drawing attention not through volume, but through the raw honesty of its delivery. The security guards looked to Reba for guidance, clearly prepared to intervene if necessary, but she held up a subtle hand gesture that told them to wait. She stood completely still, listening to every note, every inflection, every breath that Lucas poured into that beloved song. The other travelers in the area slowed their movements, unconsciously drawn to the unexpected concert happening in their midst. Lucas sang with his eyes closed, his mind filled with memories of his mother's voice joining his on countless evenings when the weight of her illness threatened to crush their spirits. This wasn't about impressing anyone or advancing his career. This was about honoring a woman who had loved this music so deeply that it had become the soundtrack to her courage. When he reached the chorus, something magical happened. Reba's voice joined his, creating a harmony that seemed to transform the sterile airport terminal into something sacred. Her rich, powerful vocals blended with his raw, emotional delivery in a way that surprised them both. Lucas's eyes flew open, and he found himself looking directly into the face of the woman who had unknowingly helped his family survive their darkest hours. They finished the song together, their voices creating something beautiful and spontaneous that neither had planned but both had needed. The small crowd that had gathered burst into applause, but Lucas barely heard it. He was lost in the moment, overwhelmed by the realization that he had just sung with his childhood idol, the woman whose music had been his mother's companion through pain and fear and ultimately acceptance. Reba approached him as the applause died down, her expression serious but kind. The security guards remained close but gave her space to move freely, clearly trusting her judgment about this young man who had touched something deep within her with his unexpected performance. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" she asked, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than polite small talk. "That wasn't just technically good, that was real." That came from somewhere deep. Lucas found his voice caught in his throat, the adrenaline of the moment finally hitting him full force. He held up his mother's photograph with shaking hands, the image slightly blurred through the tears he hadn't realized were falling. "My mama," he managed to whisper. "She passed 5 years ago from cancer, and your music, it got us through the worst of it. This song especially. She made me promise to come to Nashville and chase my dreams, but I've been here 3 months and I'm heading home tomorrow. I just wanted to see you, to say thank you for giving her comfort when nothing else could." Reba took the photograph gently, studying Sarah Thompson's face with the reverence of someone who understood the weight of such trust. She saw in that image not just a fan, but a woman who had found strength in music during the most challenging time of her life. The similarity to her own mother's struggles was not lost on her, and she felt a connection to this young man that went beyond the typical fan encounter. "Tell me about her," Reba said softly, handing the photograph back to Lucas with careful respect. "Tell me about your mama, and tell me about your music." Lucas took a deep breath, his voice still shaky from the emotional intensity of their duet. The small crowd that had gathered maintained a respectful distance, sensing they were witnessing something deeply personal and profound. Airport staff had begun to take notice of the impromptu gathering, but something about Reba's presence seemed to create a protective bubble around their conversation. "My mama, Sarah Thompson, she was the strongest woman I ever knew," Lucas began, his voice growing steadier as he spoke about the person who had shaped every dream he carried. "She grew up dirt poor in eastern Tennessee, married my daddy when she was barely 18, and never had a day of easy living in her life. But when she played your records, especially on those long summer evenings when the work was done and we'd sit on the porch, she transformed into someone magical." Reba listened intently, her full attention focused on every word. This wasn't the polite attention of a celebrity going through the motions with a fan. This was the deep listening of someone who understood that stories like this were sacred, that they carried the weight of love and loss that deserved genuine respect. "She saved every penny she could for 2 years to buy me this guitar for my 16th birthday, Lucas continued, patting the worn case that had never left his side. "Said she heard something special in my voice when I'd sing along to the radio while doing chores. She couldn't afford lessons or fancy equipment, but she taught me everything she knew about feeling music in your soul instead of just hearing it with your ears." The photograph of Sarah Thompson seemed to glow in the terminal lighting as Lucas held it between them, and Reba found herself studying every detail of the woman's face. There was something familiar about Sarah's expression, a combination of strength and gentleness that reminded her of her own mother, Jacqueline, who had also believed in the power of music to heal and inspire. When the cancer came, Lucas's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She got sicker and sicker, but she never stopped believing I had something special to offer the world. Even during her worst days, when the chemo made her so weak she could barely lift her head, she'd ask me to play your songs for her. The night the lights went out in Georgia, Fancy, Sweet Dreams. She knew every word to every song you ever recorded." Reba felt tears forming in her eyes as she recognized the profound impact her music had made on this family during their darkest hours. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had chosen a career in country music, not for fame or fortune, but for the ability to touch lives and provide comfort when people needed it most. "The last coherent conversation we had," Lucas continued, his voice breaking slightly, "she made me promise that I'd come to Nashville and share my music with the world. She said you had shown her that country music wasn't just entertainment, it was medicine for broken hearts, hope for people who felt forgotten, and a voice for those who didn't think anyone was listening to their struggles." The security guards exchanged glances, clearly moved by the story unfolding before them. One of them, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, discreetly wiped away a tear while maintaining his professional vigilance. Even the airport staff who had approached to check on the gathering seemed reluctant to interrupt something so clearly meaningful. "So I came here 3 months ago with nothing but this guitar, $500 I'd saved from odd jobs, and a heart full of hope," Lucas said, his voice gaining strength as he moved toward the painful part of his story. "I thought if I just worked hard enough, if my music was good enough, if I believed strongly enough in Mama's words, then doors would open for me the way they seemed to in all those country songs about dreamers making it big." Reba nodded knowingly, remembering her own early days in the music industry, when rejection and disappointment seemed to outnumber opportunities by a crushing margin. She had been fortunate to have guidance and support that many aspiring artists never received, and she recognized the particular kind of pain that came from feeling like your dreams were somehow inadequate in the eyes of industry gatekeepers. But Nashville turned out to be harder than I ever imagined, Lucas continued, his honesty raw and unfiltered. Not just the competition or the business side of things, but the way some people in this industry look at folks like me. Small town, no formal training, no connections, no polish. Like we're not worth their time because we don't fit their idea of what a country artist should look like or sound like. The woman from Huntsville, who had remained nearby listening to Lucas's story, nodded in recognition of the struggles he described. Her own brief interactions with the music industry while trying to promote her late mother's songs had given her glimpses of the same dismissive attitudes that had wounded Lucas so deeply. 3 days ago, I had my last audition with a producer named Marcus Kellerman, Lucas said, and Reba's expression immediately shifted to one of concern. She knew Kellerman's reputation, successful but notoriously harsh with artists who didn't fit his narrow vision of commercial viability. He didn't just reject my music, he humiliated me in front of his entire staff, called me a backwoods nobody who was wasting everyone's time. Reba's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her protective instincts flaring as she imagined the scene Lucas was describing. She had encountered Marcus Kellerman professionally over the years, and had always found him to be more interested in manufacturing hits than nurturing genuine talent. His treatment of this young man represented everything she disliked about the more commercial aspects of the music industry. I walked out of that building feeling like maybe he was right, Lucas admitted, his voice thick with shame. Maybe I was just some delusional kid who didn't understand how the real world worked. Maybe my mama's faith in me was just the blind love of a parent who couldn't see her son's limitations clearly. Now you stop right there, Reba said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in the music industry and knew genuine talent when she heard it. Marcus Kellerman wouldn't recognize authentic country music if it walked up and introduced itself personally. That man has been so busy chasing trends and manufacturing processed garbage that he's forgotten what real music sounds like. Lucas looked up at her with surprise, not expecting such a strong reaction to his story. The passion in Reba's voice was unmistakable, and he could see that his experience with Kellerman had struck a nerve that went beyond mere sympathy for a struggling artist. "Let me tell you something about your mama's faith in you," Reba continued, her voice softening but losing none of its conviction. "I've been in this business for more than 40 years, and I've heard thousands and thousands of people sing. What you just did here, that wasn't just technically proficient. That was music, with soul, with heart, with the kind of authentic emotion that you cannot fake or manufacture or learn in any school." The sincerity in her words hit Lucas like a physical force, and he felt something inside his chest that had been broken since the Kellerman audition began to heal. This wasn't empty encouragement or polite platitudes. This was Reba Mcentire, one of the most respected voices in country music, telling him that his mother had been right about his gift. "Your mama heard something in you that Marcus Kellerman was too deaf to recognize," Reba said, stepping closer to Lucas and speaking with the intensity of someone delivering a crucial message. "And I'm here to tell you that her faith was not misplaced. What I just experienced singing with you was something rare and precious, and you'd be doing a disservice to her memory and to the music world if you gave up now." The airport around them seemed to fade away as Lucas absorbed the weight of Reba's words. This moment, this unexpected encounter, was beginning to feel like more than coincidence. It felt like destiny, like his mother's spirit had somehow orchestrated this meeting to deliver the encouragement he needed to continue pursuing his dreams. Well, if it isn't the country bumpkin who wasted my time earlier this week." The voice cut through the emotional atmosphere like a blade, and Lucas felt his blood run cold as he turned to see Marcus Kellerman approaching their group. The producer looked exactly as Lucas remembered: expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, and an expression of smug superiority that seemed permanently etched on his face. He was flanked by 2 younger men in similar attire, clearly part of his entourage, and they were all looking at Lucas with barely concealed amusement. Reba's expression hardened immediately as she recognized the man who had crushed Lucas's spirit just days earlier. She had worked with Kellerman on exactly one project years ago, and the experience had left her with a lasting distaste for his arrogant approach to the music business. Seeing him now, confronting the young man whose story had moved her so deeply, ignited a protective fury that surprised even her with its intensity. "Marcus," Reba said coolly, her voice carrying decades of authority and a warning that only the most foolish would ignore. "I didn't expect to see you here. Don't you usually travel by private jet to avoid contact with the common people?" Kellerman's smile faltered slightly at her tone, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. He was clearly enjoying the opportunity to publicly demonstrate his power over struggling artists, especially with such a notable audience present. "Reba Mcentire," he said with exaggerated charm, extending his hand in a gesture that felt more like a performance than genuine courtesy. "Always a pleasure. I'm here to pick up Destiny Clark, you know, that young sensation I've been developing. She's flying in from Los Angeles after finishing her first major label recording sessions." The emphasis he placed on major label and developing was clearly intended to highlight his success, and by contrast, underscore Lucas's failure to measure up to his standards. The two younger men beside him snickered quietly, clearly accustomed to witnessing their boss's casual cruelty toward aspiring artists. "I see you've met one of Nashville's countless wannabes," Kellerman continued, his gaze fixing on Lucas with predatory satisfaction. "Though I have to say I'm surprised to find him still hanging around the city. I thought I made it pretty clear that he'd be better served finding a nice factory job back in whatever small town spawned him." Lucas felt the familiar shame burning in his chest, the same humiliation he had experienced in Kellerman's office, flooding back with crushing force. His instinct was to shrink away, to disappear into the crowd, and avoid further embarrassment. But something in Reba's posture, the protective way she positioned herself slightly in front of him, gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. "His name is Lucas Thompson," Reba said, her voice carrying the steel that had made her one of the most respected figures in country music. "And he has more genuine talent in his little finger than most of the manufactured artists you've been pushing lately." Kellerman laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humor. "Oh, please. Reba, I respect your legacy, I really do. But you're living in the past. This isn't the 1980s anymore. The industry has evolved. We need artists who can adapt to modern markets, who understand branding and social media presence and cross-platform appeal." He gestured dismissively toward Lucas, who was clutching his guitar case like a shield against the verbal assault. "This kid showed up to my office looking like he just stepped off a farm, with songs that sound like they were written 50 years ago. No polish, no sophistication, no understanding of what today's audiences want to hear." The small crowd that had gathered to witness Reba's arrival was now watching this confrontation with fascination and growing discomfort. Several people were discreetly recording with their phones, sensing that they were witnessing something significant unfolding in real time. "What today's audiences want," Reba replied, her voice rising slightly with controlled anger, "is authenticity. They want artists who have lived real lives, who understand struggle and hope and loss, who can connect with people on a human level instead of just selling them processed pop music disguised as country." She turned slightly toward Lucas, including him in her response, while keeping her attention focused on Kellerman. "This young man just sang with more heart and soul than I've heard in years of listening to your cookie-cutter artists. His mother died believing in his gift, and that gift is real whether you're capable of recognizing it or not." Kellerman's expression shifted to one of irritated condescension, clearly annoyed that his public humiliation of Lucas was being challenged by someone whose opinion carried weight in the industry. His ego, already substantial, seemed to inflate further as he prepared to deliver what he obviously considered a decisive blow. "Sentiment is touching, Reba, but it doesn't sell records," he said with calculated cruelty. "This business isn't a charity for people with sad stories and moderate talent. If his mother really cared about his future, she would have encouraged him to develop some practical skills instead of filling his head with impossible dreams." The silence that followed this statement was deafening. Even Kellerman's own entourage looked uncomfortable with the viciousness of his attack on a deceased woman's memory. The security guards stepped closer, clearly prepared to intervene if the situation escalated further. Lucas felt something snap inside him, a protective fury that had nothing to do with his own wounded pride and everything to do with defending his mother's honor. For the first time since entering Kellerman's office days earlier, he found his voice, and when he spoke it was with a strength that surprised everyone present, including himself. "Don't you dare talk about my mother that way," Lucas said, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that was somehow more powerful than shouting. She worked 2 jobs to keep food on our table and still found time to encourage my dreams. She fought cancer for 3 years with more grace and courage than you've shown in this entire conversation. Her faith in me wasn't misguided. It was the most precious gift she could have given me. Reba felt a surge of pride watching Lucas stand up for himself and his mother's memory. This was the fire she had heard in his voice during their duet, the passion that no amount of industry polish could replicate or replace. "Oh, you want to know what's wrong with Nashville?" Lucas continued, his confidence growing with each word. "It's people like you who think music is just a product to be manufactured and sold, who've forgotten that the best country songs come from real experiences, real pain, real joy. My mama understood that better than you ever will." Kellerman's face flushed red with anger at being challenged so directly, especially in front of a growing audience that was clearly beginning to side with the young man he had tried to humiliate. His carefully constructed image of superiority was cracking under the weight of Lucas's honest emotion. "You insolent little—" Kellerman began, but Reba cut him off with a gesture that brooked no argument. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect. "Marcus, you've shown everyone here exactly who you are, and it's not pretty, but you've also given me an opportunity to show them something beautiful." She turned to Lucas, her expression softening as she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The airport terminal seemed to hold its collective breath as one of country music's greatest legends prepared to make a statement that would be talked about for years to come. "Lucas," she said, her voice clear and strong so that everyone present could hear her words, "I want you to sing again, right here, right now. Show everyone what real country music sounds like when it comes from the heart, instead of a marketing department." Lucas felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the terminal focused on him, as Reba's challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down before a knight. His hands trembled as he looked from her encouraging face to Kellerman's sneering expression, then to the crowd of strangers who had become unwitting witnesses to this moment that would define the rest of his life. The guitar case in his hands suddenly felt both impossibly heavy and weightless at the same time. This wasn't a planned performance or a scheduled audition. This was raw, unfiltered truth about to be laid bare in the most public way possible. Everything his mother had believed about him, everything he had hoped to become, every dream that had sustained him through months of rejection, all of it would be tested in the next few minutes. "I don't have my guitar tuned," Lucas said quietly, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the busy terminal. It was a weak excuse and everyone knew it, but the magnitude of the moment was overwhelming him. Reba smiled with the understanding of someone who had faced her own share of terrifying performance moments. "Honey, the best country music doesn't need perfect tuning. It needs perfect honesty. Your mama didn't raise you to be perfect. She raised you to be real." With hands that shook despite his best efforts to control them, Lucas unlatched his guitar case and lifted out the worn acoustic guitar that had been his companion through every triumph and failure of the past decade. The instrument looked even more weathered under the harsh airport lighting, its scratched surface and faded finish telling the story of countless hours of practice, countless dreams whispered to its strings in the quiet moments between hope and despair. As he quickly tuned the guitar, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed him, Lucas became aware of the growing crowd around them. Airport travelers had stopped their hurried journeys to see what was happening, pulled by the unmistakable energy of something significant unfolding. Phone cameras appeared like fireflies in the gathering dusk of the terminal, ready to capture whatever was about to happen. Kellerman crossed his arms and leaned back against a nearby pillar, his expression clearly conveying his expectation that Lucas would humiliate himself and prove the producer's harsh assessment correct. The 2 men flanking him whispered quietly to each other, probably making cruel jokes about the amateur hour they were about to witness. But in that moment of maximum pressure, when failure would mean not just personal disappointment, but public humiliation witnessed by hundreds of strangers and recorded for posterity on dozens of phones, Lucas felt his mother's presence more strongly than he had since the day she died. It wasn't a supernatural experience or a mystical vision. It was simply the accumulated weight of 28 years of unconditional love and unshakable faith suddenly crystallizing into unbreakable resolve. "This one's for you, Mama," he whispered to the worn photograph he had tucked into his shirt pocket, then looked up at the expectant faces surrounding him and began to play. The song that emerged from his guitar and voice wasn't one of Reba's hits or a carefully chosen crowd pleaser. Instead, it was an original composition he had written during his mother's final weeks, a raw and honest expression of grief and gratitude that he had never performed for another living soul. The melody was simple but haunting, the kind of tune that stayed with you long after the last note faded away. The lyrics told the story of a woman who had loved fiercely despite having so little, who had seen possibility where others saw only limitations, who had given her son the greatest gift imaginable, the courage to believe in himself, even when the world seemed determined to prove him wrong. It was the story of Sarah Thompson, but it was also the story of countless mothers who had sacrificed their own dreams to nurture the dreams of their children. As Lucas sang, something magical happened in that busy airport terminal. Conversations stopped. Hurried footsteps slowed. The constant background noise of modern travel faded to a respectful whisper as his voice carried across the space with the kind of authentic emotion that transcends genre boundaries and speaks directly to the human heart. Even Kellerman's smug expression began to falter as he found himself involuntarily drawn into the spell that Lucas was weaving with his words and melody. This wasn't the polished performance of a manufactured artist or the technically perfect delivery of a trained professional. This was something rarer and more valuable, the sound of a human soul laid completely bare through music. Reba felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to Lucas pour his heart out in song. She had been right about his gift, but even she hadn't anticipated the depth of emotion he was capable of channeling through his music. This young man wasn't just talented, he was that rarest of creatures, a true artist whose pain and joy could transform the ordinary world into something transcendent. When Lucas reached the bridge of his song, his voice cracking slightly with emotion, but never losing its power, Reba made a decision that would be talked about in country music circles for decades to come. She stepped forward and added her voice to his, not as the star allowing a fan to share her spotlight, but as a fellow musician recognizing and honoring a peer whose talent demanded respect. Their voices blended together in perfect harmony, creating something that was greater than the sum of its parts. The crowd around them was completely silent now, mesmerized by the impromptu duet that had transformed a chance airport encounter into something approaching the sacred. As the final notes of the song faded away, the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before exploding into thunderous applause. The ovation wasn't polite or obligatory, it was the kind of genuine appreciation that comes from witnessing something truly special, something that reminds you why music exists in the first place. Kellerman stood frozen, his face pale and his earlier arrogance completely deflated. He had built his career on his ability to recognize and package talent, and he was forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that he had not only missed something extraordinary, but had actively tried to destroy it. That, Reba announced to the crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the terminal, is what real country music sounds like. That is what happens when genuine talent meets authentic emotion and fearless honesty. She turned to face Kellerman directly, her expression stern but not cruel. Marcus, you owe this young man an apology. More than that, you owe the entire music industry an apology for trying to crush exactly the kind of artist we desperately need more of. But Reba wasn't finished. What she said next would change Lucas Thompson's life forever and prove that sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales do come true for those who refuse to give up on their dreams. Lucas, she said, turning to face him with a smile that radiated genuine warmth and excitement, I have a proposition for you. My tour manager is going to have a heart attack, but I want you to open for me on the next leg of my tour. 6 cities, starting next month. It won't make you rich, but it will give you the platform you need to show the world what I just witnessed here tonight. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Lucas barely heard them. He was staring at Reba in complete shock, unable to process what she had just offered him. Opening for Reba Mcentire, the dream that had seemed impossible just hours earlier was suddenly being handed to him by the woman herself. But that's not all, Reba continued, clearly enjoying the stunned expression on Lucas's face. I'm also going to call my friend at Red Bow Records first thing Monday morning. They need to hear that song you just sang, and they need to hear it from you. I have a feeling your mama's dreams for you were just the beginning of something incredible. 6 months later, Lucas Thompson stood on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, his mother's photograph tucked safely in his shirt pocket, and his voice stronger than it had ever been. The song he had written about Sarah Thompson had become a #1 hit on the country charts, touching millions of hearts with its message of love, loss, and the power of believing in someone completely. In the audience, Reba Mcentire watched with tears of joy in her eyes as the young man she had discovered in an airport terminal received a standing ovation from the most respected venue in country music. She knew that somewhere Sarah Thompson was watching too, her faith in her son finally vindicated in the most spectacular way possible. The story of Lucas and Reba's airport encounter had become legendary, shared millions of times on social media and inspiring countless other dreamers to never give up on their aspirations. But for Lucas, the real miracle wasn't the fame or the success. It was the knowledge that his mother's love had guided him to exactly where he needed to be, at exactly the right moment, to meet the person who would help him share his gift with the world. As he took his final bow that night at the Opry, Lucas whispered the same words he had spoken in that airport terminal 6 months earlier. "This one's for you, Mama." And in his heart, he knew she was smiling.